He found a wallet thick enough to buy him a new life, but returning it brought something far more dangerous and far more valuable knocking at his door. He called the abandoned boiler room home, but it was really just a place to escape the rain. The city of Philadelphia had a way of weeping that got into your bones, a cold, persistent drizzle that promised nothing but a deeper chill. Arthur knew that chill better than he knew his own reflection anymore. For 2 years, the streets had been his world, a blur of indifferent faces and cracked pavement. Tonight, the rain was relentless, turning the alley behind the old cannery into a dark, gurgling stream. He was huddled under a rusted fire escape when he saw it, a small, dark rectangle lying perilously close to a drain, a wallet. It wasn't just any wallet, it was thick, made of soft, worn leather that spoke of a life far removed from his own. His first instinct was pure, primal survival. He snatched it up, his heart hammering against his ribs, and scurried back into the shadows of his makeshift sanctuary. The boiler was long dead, but its metal shell offered a shield from the wind. With trembling, frost-bitten fingers, he opened it. Inside, a fan of crisp $100 bills stared back at him. He counted them slowly, his breath catching in his throat. $2,000, enough for a motel room for a month, enough for hot meals, a new coat, a bus ticket to somewhere warm. It was a miracle lying in his palm. It was the answer to prayers he'd long forgotten how to speak. But then, beneath the cash, he saw something else. A driver's license with the name Angelo Rossi. The man in the photo was old, with kind, tired eyes and a soft smile. He looked like someone's grandfather. Tucked into a separate sleeve was a faded photograph, cracked at the edges, of a smiling woman with a little boy on her lap. The boy wore a serious expression, but his eyes held a familiar spark.
A family. A life. He stared at the money, then at the photo. The $2,000 could give him a fleeting escape from his reality, a temporary warmth. But the photo was a piece of someone's soul. It was a memory, a history, a connection to a world he once knew. The cold in his bones felt different now. It wasn't just from the weather. It was the chill of a profound choice. He could take the money and disappear. Who would ever know? In this city, a man like him was invisible.
Or he could return it. He could walk into a world where he didn't belong, to a man who had everything, and hand back the one thing that could change his own life. The rain hammered against the tin roof above him, each drop a ticking clock, counting down his decision. What would you do? Would you open that door to a new life, even if it meant closing a door on your own conscience? Comment below. Would you open that door? The battle inside Arthur was a silent, raging storm that mirrored the one outside. $2,000. The number echoed in his mind, a siren song of possibility. It was more money than he'd held in his hands in years. He imagined the simple luxuries it could buy. A steaming cup of coffee without having to count out his change, a thick sandwich with meat piled high, the incredible feeling of sleeping in a real bed with clean sheets. He could buy a new pair of boots, ones without holes in the soles that let the icy water seep in. He could be anonymous in a cheap motel, just another face, instead of the ghost haunting this alley. He spread the bills out on the dusty floor, the green and white figures looking alien in the dim light filtering through a grimy window. It was a fortune. It was freedom, but his eyes kept drifting back to the wallet, to the faded photograph of the woman and the little boy. The woman's smile was gentle, loving. The boy's gaze was intense, protective, even at that young age. They were a family, frozen in a happy moment. He remembered having a photo like that once, of his own wife and daughter, tucked away in a wallet he'd lost long ago. He remembered the sting of losing not the money, but that small, irreplaceable square of paper. The memory was a physical ache in his chest, a phantom limb of a life that had been amputated. This, Angelo Rossi, the man with the kind eyes, this was his life in his hands. This was his wife, his son. How could he take that? How could he buy himself a few weeks of comfort at the cost of another man's heart. He thought about the man's face again. He looked to be in his 80s, frail. Maybe he was confused. Maybe he didn't even realize it was gone yet. Arthur knew what it was like to lose things. First, it was his job at the shipyard, then his savings, then his apartment. Then slowly, the respect of his neighbors, the light in his wife's eyes, and finally, his family. You lose things one by one until you're left with nothing but the clothes on your back and the ghosts in your head. He couldn't be the one to add to another person's loss. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his entire life, he carefully placed the bills back inside the wallet, tucking the photograph securely into its sleeve. He zipped up his thin, torn jacket and looked at the address on the driver's license. It was only 10 blocks away, in the old Italian neighborhood on the south side of town. It was a place of brick row houses and tight-knit families, a world away from his alley. He had made his decision. Now he just had to find the courage to see it through. But finding the address was one thing. Walking up to that imposing house as a ragged, homeless man was another. What would they think when they saw him? Would they even open the door? The 10-block walk felt like a pilgrimage across a foreign land. Each step took him further from the familiar squalor of his alley and deeper into a neighborhood that hummed with a quiet, dignified life. Christmas lights, though it was only October, were already wound around porch railings on some houses, their gentle glow reflecting on the wet pavement. The smell of garlic and baking bread drifted from a corner bakery, a scent so warm and comforting it made Arthur's stomach ache with a hollow emptiness. He clutched the wallet in his pocket, its presence a heavy, awkward secret. He felt like an intruder, a stain on the clean fabric of this community. Every person he passed, every curtain that twitched in a window, felt like an accusation. The address led him to a 2-story brick house, indistinguishable from its neighbors except for its meticulous upkeep. The wrought iron fence was freshly painted, the small patch of lawn was perfectly manicured, and a single, warm light burned in a downstairs window. It looked like a fortress of normalcy, a place he could never belong. His courage faltered. What was he thinking? A man like him showing up on a doorstep like this? They'd call the cops before he could even speak. They'd see his dirty clothes, his unshaven face, his desperate eyes, and they'd assume the worst. They would never believe he was there to do something good. He imagined the door opening, a face contorted with suspicion and fear. He imagined being shouted at, accused of theft, humiliated. The $2,000 in the wallet suddenly felt like bait in a trap. Maybe he should just mail it. But he didn't have an envelope, let alone a stamp. He could just leave it in the mailbox.
No, what if someone else took it? His mind raced, a frantic search for an exit. But then he thought of the old man's face, of the woman in the photograph. He had to make sure it got back to them. Summoning a reserve of will he didn't know he possessed, he walked through the gate and up the 3 stone steps to the porch. His heart was a wild drum against his ribs. He decided he wouldn't knock. He wouldn't risk the confrontation. He'd just leave it, make sure it was seen, and then vanish.
He gently placed the wallet on the doormat, right in the center where it couldn't be missed. Then, his finger hovering for a second, he pressed the doorbell. The chime echoed from deep within the house. He didn't wait for a response. He spun around, hurried down the steps, and melted back into the shadows of the rain-slicked street, his footsteps silent. He looked back just once from the corner of the block and saw the porch light flick on, illuminating an empty stoop. He thought that was the end of it. He was profoundly, dangerously wrong. Returning to the boiler room felt like a descent into a colder, darker hell. The momentary brush with a life of warmth and order had made his own reality feel impossibly bleak. The damp chill seemed to seep deeper into his marrow, and the hunger that had been a dull, constant companion now gnawed at him with sharp teeth. He huddled in his corner, wrapping his thin jacket tighter around himself, but there was no escaping the cold that came from within. He had done the right thing. He repeated the words to himself like a mantra, a desperate prayer for them to feel true. He had honored another man's life, another man's memories, but what about his own? What about the gnawing emptiness in his stomach? A bitter voice in the back of his mind mocked him. He was a fool. A noble, starving fool. $2,000. He could be halfway to Florida by now, sleeping in a warm bed, the rain just a gentle sound on a motel roof instead of a relentless enemy. He had held a winning lottery ticket and had chosen to tear it up. Doubt, cold and sharp, began to creep in. What if the old man was a tyrant? What if the money was nothing to him? He'd probably just grunt, toss the wallet on the table and forget all about it. Arthur had sacrificed his one chance for a man who would never know his name, never know the war that had been fought in a homeless man's soul over his lost property. The hours crawled by, the rain finally subsided, leaving behind a city that glistened under the orange glow of the streetlights. Arthur couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old building, every distant siren made him jump. He felt exposed, vulnerable. It was then that he saw it. A black sedan, a Lincoln, cruising slowly down the alley. It had no reason to be there. Its tires crunched softly on the gravel, its headlights cutting sharp, sweeping beams across the graffiti-covered brick walls. It moved with a quiet, predatory grace that didn't belong in this forgotten corner of the city. The car passed the entrance to his boiler room, slowed, and then continued to the end of the alley, where it turned and disappeared. Arthur's heart, which had just started to calm, was now pounding again, a frantic bird trapped in his chest. It was nothing, he told himself, just someone taking a shortcut. But a few minutes later, it returned, this time from the opposite direction, moving just as slowly, its windows tinted so dark they looked like polished obsidian. A cold dread, entirely different from his earlier regret, began to settle over him. They weren't lost. They weren't taking a shortcut. They were looking for something. Was it a coincidence? Or had they seen him? Maybe the house had a camera. Maybe they had a blurry image of a man in a ragged jacket. And now they were hunting for him. But why? To thank him? People in cars like that didn't deliver thank you notes. They delivered messages. He shrunk further into the shadows, making himself as small as possible, praying the darkness would swallow him whole. Was the car looking for something? Or for someone? Inside the brick house, the atmosphere was thick with a mixture of relief and quiet fury. Leo Rossi held the wallet in his hand, turning the soft leather over and over. He wasn't the kind of man who showed much emotion. His face was a calm, controlled mask that had been perfected over years of leading his family. But inside, a storm was brewing. His father, Angelo, sat in a large armchair by the fireplace, looking frail and agitated. Since his wife, Elena, had passed, his mind had started to wander, and his memory was becoming a fragile, shifting thing. But his love for her remained a fierce, anchoring point in his fog. "The picture, Leo?" Angelo whispered, his voice thin as paper. "Is the picture there?" Leo opened the wallet and pulled out the faded photograph of his mother holding him as a child. He handed it to his father. Angelo clutched it to his chest, his whole body relaxing as if a great weight had been lifted. He closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the weathered lines on his cheek. For Leo, that single tear was a testament to a profound violation. His father, in his vulnerability, had been exposed. He had wandered out of the house in a moment of confusion, a habit that was becoming terrifyingly frequent, and had lost the most precious thing he owned. Leo had installed a simple doorbell camera last month, more for his father's safety than for security. He pulled up the footage on his tablet. The timestamp was just after 10 p.m. The video was grainy, distorted by the pouring rain. It showed a figure hunched against the weather, moving quickly. The person walked up the steps, placed the wallet on the doormat, rang the bell, and then vanished as quickly as they had appeared. There was no face, no clear features, just the silhouette of a man in a worn-out jacket. The man hadn't even waited for a reward. He hadn't knocked. He had simply returned what was lost and disappeared. This gesture, in its quiet humility, struck Leo more than any grand display would have. In his world, actions were everything. There were codes. You paid your debts. You protected your family. You respected acts of honor. This stranger, this ghost in the rain, had performed an act of profound honor. He could have taken the $2,000 and vanished. No one would have ever known, but he hadn't. He had protected Angelo's most treasured memory. He had, in his own way, protected the Rossi family. Leo felt a debt had been incurred, a significant one, and the Rossi family always paid their debts. He turned to his cousin, Marco, who stood silently by the door. "Find him," Leo said, his voice low and steady. "Check the neighborhood. Ask around. Show this picture." He held up the tablet with the grainy image of the stranger. "I don't want him scared. I just want to talk to him."
I want to know who in this neighborhood still understands respect. This wasn't just about a lost wallet anymore. It was a test of the neighborhood's character. And someone had passed with flying colors. Now he had to find him. The neighborhood began to close in on Arthur, not with walls, but with whispers. The quiet, unspoken network that connected the brick houses and corner stores crackled with a new energy.
In the morning, when Arthur ventured out to the soup kitchen for a piece of bread and some watery coffee, he noticed the change immediately. The usual indifference he was met with was gone. Instead, there were eyes that lingered a second too long. The old woman who ran the kitchen, Maria, who normally just slid his tray across the counter without a word, paused. She looked at him, then at a man standing by the door, a man in a nice coat who didn't belong there, and then back at him. She said nothing, but her gaze was a question he couldn't answer. Later, as he sat on a park bench, trying to soak up the weak morning sun, he saw two men he recognized as local fixtures, men who ran the social club on the next block, strolling by. They were talking to a street vendor, and one of them gestured discreetly in his direction. Arthur's paranoia, which had been simmering all night, began to boil. The black Lincoln was gone, but its presence remained, a phantom threat. Now it felt like the entire neighborhood was its eyes and ears. He was being watched. He was being hunted. He tried to tell himself it was his imagination, a product of a guilty conscience and an empty stomach, but the feeling was too real, too pervasive. He heard snippets of conversation as people passed by. The guy who found it, Rossi is looking for him. Some homeless fellow, they say. Each partial phrase was a jolt of pure adrenaline. They knew, but what did they know? And what did looking for him mean? In this neighborhood, those words could have 100 different meanings, and most of them weren't good. The fear was a physical thing now, a cold knot in his stomach. He had made a colossal mistake. By returning the wallet, he hadn't ended the story. He had written himself into it. He had drawn the attention of people you didn't want attention from. He should have just thrown the wallet in a gutter. He should have taken the money and run. He thought about leaving, about packing his few meager belongings into a plastic bag and just walking until this city was a memory. But where would he go? This city, for all its cruelty, was the only home he knew. He was trapped. The men from the social club were walking toward the park now. They weren't looking at him directly, but he could feel their approach like a change in air pressure. He stood up, his heart pounding, and started to walk away, trying to look casual, trying to look like just another nameless ghost drifting through the city. But he felt their eyes on him, the whispers of the neighborhood following him like a shadow. He spent the rest of the day in a state of high alert, moving through the city like a fugitive. He avoided his usual spots, sticking to the more crowded, anonymous streets downtown where he could blend into the sea of faces. But even there, he felt exposed. Every well-dressed man, every dark-colored car that slowed down, sent a fresh wave of panic through him. He imagined being cornered, dragged into a car, and taken to some warehouse to answer for a crime he didn't understand. What did they think he did? Did they believe he had stolen the wallet first, then got scared and returned it? Maybe they thought he'd copied the credit card numbers. His mind, starved and exhausted, conjured a dozen terrifying scenarios, each more grim than the last. As dusk began to settle, casting long, menacing shadows across the city, he knew he couldn't stay away from his shelter forever. His thin jacket was no match for the dropping temperature, and the thought of the relative protection of the boiler room was a powerful lure. He took a circuitous route back, doubling back on himself several times, checking over his shoulder constantly. The alley was dark and empty when he arrived. He slipped inside, his body screaming with relief at being out of sight. But the relief was short-lived. The silence in the boiler room felt different tonight. It was heavy, watchful. He had the distinct, unnerving feeling that he was not alone. He froze, straining his ears, listening for the sound of breathing, a shuffle of feet. Nothing. Just the drip of water from a leaky pipe and the distant hum of the city. He was letting his fear run away with him. He was seeing ghosts in every shadow. He was just about to settle into his corner when he heard it. The soft crunch of gravel just outside the open doorway. It was the sound of deliberate footsteps. 2 sets. They stopped right at the entrance. Arthur's blood ran cold. He was trapped. There was no other way out. 2 figures filled the doorway, their broad shoulders blocking out the dim light from the alley. They were tall, well-built, and wore dark, expensive-looking wool coats. They didn't look like cops. They looked like something else entirely. They stepped inside, their presence seeming to suck all the air out of the small room. One of them had a small, jagged scar above his eyebrow. The other had eyes that seemed to see right through Arthur's fear, to the desperate man huddled inside. "We're looking for someone," the man with the scar said. His voice was calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying. An honest man. Arthur's mouth was dry as dust. He couldn't speak. He just shook his head, a small, involuntary movement. He thought of the code of the streets. You see nothing, you say nothing, deny everything. Don't know anyone like that, he managed to whisper, his voice cracking. The man with the scar took another step forward. He pulled a phone from his pocket and showed Arthur the screen. It was the blurry image from the doorbell camera. Even in the gloom, the ragged jacket was unmistakable. It was him. "You sure about that?" the man asked, his voice still unnervingly calm. "Because this looks a lot like you. Mr. Rossi just wants to thank you." Arthur's mind screamed. This was a test, a trap. They were trying to get him to admit it. He had to deny it. He had to. He shook his head again, more forcefully this time. "It's not me."
"I don't know what you're talking about." He had told the lie, but their eyes, cold and patient, told him they didn't believe it for a single second. The 2 men stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching until it was a thin, humming wire. Arthur held his breath, expecting the worst. He expected anger, a threat, the sudden, sharp reality of violence. Instead, the man with the scar simply sighed, a sound of mild disappointment, not menace. He put his phone back in his pocket.
"Okay," he said, sharing a look with his partner. "If you say so." He reached into his coat, and for a terrifying second, Arthur thought he was pulling out a weapon. But it was just a business card. He stepped forward and tucked it into the pocket of Arthur's tattered jacket. "My name is Marco," he said. "If you change your mind, or if you happen to find the man we're looking for, tell him Mr. Leo Rossi wants to see him. He's not in any trouble. This is about respect." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "Mr. Rossi believes in paying his debts, good and bad." With that, they turned and walked out, their footsteps receding down the alley until there was only silence again. Arthur stood frozen, his heart hammering against his ribs like it wanted out. He didn't understand. If they knew it was him, why didn't they press him? Why didn't they force him? The encounter had been nothing like he'd imagined. There was no shouting, no threats, just a calm, almost formal request. "This is about respect." The words echoed in his head. Mr. Leo Rossi, he knew that name. Everyone in the South Philly neighborhoods knew that name. It was a name spoken in hushed tones, a name associated with power, with influence that ran deeper than the city governments. Leo Rossi was the head of the family that had quietly run this part of the city for generations. They weren't street thugs, they were an institution. And they wanted to see him, not to punish him, but to... what? Thank him? It didn't make sense. The world he knew, the world that had chewed him up and spit him out, didn't operate on gratitude and respect. It operated on power and survival. You took what you could get, and you didn't look back. His act of returning the wallet, an act born from a flicker of his old self, had pierced the veil between his world and theirs. He had inadvertently stumbled into a system with rules he didn't comprehend. The fear that had gripped him for the past day began to slowly recede, replaced by a profound and unsettling bewilderment. He pulled the business card from his pocket. It was thick, expensive cardstock with just a name, Marco, and a phone number printed in simple, elegant text. This was real. This was happening. For the first time, a sliver of a different possibility entered his mind. What if they were telling the truth? What if they really did just want to thank him? But why? Why would a man like Leo Rossi care about a forgotten, homeless man like him? Arthur didn't sleep that night. He sat in the darkness of the boiler room, the business card in his hand, feeling its sharp edges, its impossible smoothness. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion and a strange, fragile new feeling, curiosity. The fear hadn't vanished completely. It was a deep-seated instinct, honed by years of hardship. But it was no longer the all-consuming terror it had been. These men, the Rossi family, operated by a code. He knew that much from the whispers and legends of the neighborhood. It was a code of honor, of loyalty, of debts paid and slights remembered. He had, without realizing it, engaged with that code. He had shown respect for their patriarch, Angelo, and now they intended to respond in kind. What did that even mean? A $20 bill slipped into his hand. A thanks, now get lost? The sheer gulf between his life and theirs made any real connection seem absurd. By dawn, he had made a decision. He wasn't going to call, he wasn't going to seek them out. The risk was still too great, the unknown too vast. He would simply lay low and hope that they would lose interest and their search would fade away. He convinced himself that their respect was a fleeting notion and that the realities of their world would soon distract them from the trivial matter of a returned wallet. He spent the morning keeping his head down, sticking to the shadows. But as he was returning to the alley in the early afternoon, he saw the black Lincoln again. It was parked at the end of the block, patient and silent, like a panther waiting in the grass. This time, he knew it wasn't a coincidence. They weren't searching anymore. They were waiting for him. He ducked behind a dumpster, his heart starting to pound again. He could run. He could try to lose them in the labyrinth of the city. But what then? Would he spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder? He was tired of running, tired of being scared, tired of being invisible. He thought of Marco's words. He's not in any trouble. He took a deep breath. He had done nothing wrong. He had, in fact, done something right. For the first time in a long time, he decided to stop acting like a criminal. He stepped out from behind the dumpster and started walking toward the alley, toward his shelter, in full view of the car. Nothing happened. The car didn't move. No one got out. He made it to the boiler room, his back tingling, expecting a hand on his shoulder at any moment. He sat down in his usual spot, his nerves frayed, and then he heard it. Not the soft crunch of gravel this time, but a firm, solid knock on the steel doorframe of his shelter. It was a sound no one had ever made before. It was a sound that acknowledged this place as a home, a sound that acknowledged him as being inside it. He slowly got to his feet and walked to the entrance. Standing there, flanked by Marco and the other man, was a third man. He was in his 40s, with dark hair, a sharp suit, and eyes that held a quiet, formidable intelligence. He wasn't physically imposing like his men, but his presence commanded the space around him. Arthur knew instantly who he was. It was Leo Rossi. He was face to face with the most powerful man in the neighborhood, and he had no idea if he was about to be rewarded or erased. Leo Rossi's gaze was direct but not unkind. It was assessing, discerning, the look of a man who missed nothing. He took in Arthur's worn clothes, the exhaustion etched on his face, the makeshift nature of his home, yet his expression remained one of quiet respect. There was no pity, no condescension. "Are you the man who found my father's wallet?" Leo asked. His voice was calm, a low baritone that carried easily in the still air of the boiler room. It was not a question, but a confirmation. Arthur found his own voice, surprised it didn't shake. "Yes, my name is Leo Rossi. My father is Angelo." He gestured back toward the street. He would thank you himself, but his health is not what it used to be. Arthur simply nodded, unsure of what to say. "I believe my cousins spoke to you yesterday," Leo continued, glancing at Marco. "I apologize if they caused you any alarm. It was not our intention. It was important to me that I find you." Arthur finally spoke the question that had been burning in his mind. "Why?" Leo's eyes softened for a fraction of a second. "The money in that wallet? It's nothing to my family. We could lose 10 times that amount and not notice. But what was also in that wallet," he paused, "was the last photograph I have of my mother from before she passed. It's the only thing my father has that helps him remember her clearly on his bad days." He looked at Arthur intently. "You could have taken the cash, $2,000. To a man in your position, that's a new life. No one would have blamed you. No one would have ever known. But you brought it back. You left it on the porch. And you walked away, asking for nothing." He took a step closer, lowering his voice slightly. "In my family, we have principles, rules. You don't steal from your neighbors. You protect the vulnerable. You show respect to your elders. These are the things that hold a community together when everything else falls apart. You, a stranger with nothing to your name, upheld our code better than some men who have sworn oaths to it. You protected a piece of my family. An act of honor like that cannot go unanswered." Arthur listened, stunned. He had thought he was just returning a lost item. He never imagined his simple act would be interpreted through such a powerful, ancient lens. He wasn't just a homeless man who got lucky. In their eyes, he was a man of honor, a man who understood respect. He wasn't just talking about a wallet anymore. He was talking about family, about loyalty, about a code that bound them all together in this forgotten corner of the city. Arthur was speechless. The world had stopped making sense. Men like Leo Rossi, men who moved in a world of shadows and power, were supposed to be ruthless, cold. But the man standing before him was speaking of honor and family with a sincerity that was disarming. He was looking at Arthur not as a piece of refuse the city had forgotten, but as an equal, a peer in a moral transaction. I just did what was right," Arthur stammered, the words feeling small and inadequate. Leo smiled, a rare, thin smile that didn't quite reach his eyes but held no malice. "Doing what's right when it costs you nothing is easy. You did what was right when it cost you everything you could have hoped for. That is different. That is character." He looked around the boiler room, his gaze taking in the bare concrete floor, the single filthy blanket, the profound emptiness of the space. "A man of your character does not belong here." He looked back at Arthur. "I understand you used to be a carpenter. A good one. Worked at the naval shipyard before it closed down." Arthur's eyes widened. How could he possibly know that? Marco spoke for the first time. "We asked around. People remember you built things. You were respected." The words, "you were respected," hit Arthur like a physical blow. A reminder of a life so distant it felt like it belonged to someone else. Leo continued, "My family owns a number of properties in this neighborhood. Old buildings. They always need work. Repairs, upkeep. We have a workshop a few blocks from here. It's been empty for a year, ever since the last man retired. It has all the tools. Above it, there's a small apartment. It's not much, but it's warm. And it's clean. He paused, letting the words sink in. Arthur felt his knees go weak. He didn't dare to hope. He didn't dare to understand where this was going. The workshop and the apartment are yours? Leo said, his voice leaving no room for argument. We'll put you on our payroll. You'll be the caretaker for 4 of our buildings. You will have a job, a home, a purpose. He reached into his coat and pulled out not a wallet, not a weapon, but a simple, old-fashioned keychain with 2 brass keys on it. He held it out. This is not charity, Leo said firmly, his eyes locking with Arthur's. This is a debt being paid. You showed my family respect. You will now be under my family's protection. You are part of this neighborhood.
And we take care of our own. The keys dangled in the space between them, gleaming in the dim light. They represented a world Arthur thought he would never see again. A world with doors, with locks, with a place to call home. It was too much. It felt unreal. A gift so large it felt like a trap. The silence in the boiler room was absolute, broken only by the frantic beating of Arthur's own heart. He stared at the keys, then at Leo Rossi's unreadable face.
His mind, so accustomed to suspicion, was screaming at him. Nothing is free, there's always a catch. A man like Leo Rossi doesn't just give things away. Why? Arthur finally managed to ask, his voice hoarse. Why me? Leo didn't waver. I already told you. You passed a test you didn't know you were taking. Look, I'm not a saint. My business is my business, but my father's memory, the honor of my family, that is sacred. You did us a service, a real one. In our world, a service like that creates a bond. It's that simple. He gestured with the keys again. I'm not asking you to do anything illegal. I'm not asking you to be my soldier. I'm asking you to be my carpenter. I need a man I can trust to fix a roof, to mend a fence, to keep my properties from falling apart. I need a man with honor. I believe you are that man. Arthur looked at Marco, then at the other man. Their faces were stoic, but he saw no threat in their eyes. He saw something that looked almost like approval. They were witnesses to their leader upholding the code. This wasn't a trick, it was a ceremony. This was how their world worked. All his life, he had believed in working hard, in being honest, in doing the right thing. The world had punished him for it, grinding him down until he was nothing. And now, in this dark, forgotten place, the very people he should have feared most were rewarding him for it. They were the only ones who had seen the man he used to be, the man he still was, buried beneath the grime and despair. The logic was insane, but it was also the only thing that had made sense in years. He thought about another night spent in the cold, another day of gnawing hunger, another look of disgust from a stranger. Then he looked at the keys. They weren't just metal, they were a chance, a second chance he never thought he'd get, delivered by the most unlikely of saviors. Tears welled in his eyes, hot and shameful, the first he'd shed in years. He wiped them away with the back of a dirty hand. Okay, he whispered, a single word that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He reached out a trembling hand and took the keychain from Leo. The brass was cool and solid against his skin. Leo nodded once, a gesture of finality. Marco will take you there. He'll show you the apartment, the workshop. Get yourself cleaned up. Get some rest. You start work on Monday. He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. And Arthur, he said, without looking back, welcome back to the neighborhood. He took the keys, their weight feeling heavier and more full of promise than any burden he had ever carried. Marco led him out of the alley and into a clean black SUV. The leather seats were soft. The air inside was warm and smelled faintly of polish. It was a sensory shock after the perpetual damp and grime of the boiler room. They drove in silence for a few blocks, the city lights sliding past the tinted windows. Arthur watched the familiar streets look completely different from this perspective, as if he were seeing them for the first time. They pulled up in front of a 3-story brick building. The ground floor had a large, dark window with the faded words, "Gallows Fine Woodworking," barely visible on the glass. "This is it," Marco said, his voice less intimidating now. He led Arthur to a side door and unlocked it. The door opened into a vast workshop. The air was thick with the ghost smell of sawdust, wood stain, and oil. Workbenches lined the walls, covered in a fine layer of dust. Tools hung from pegboards, saws, hammers, chisels, planes, all silent and waiting. It was a cathedral of creation, and it was his. "Everything works," Marco said, flipping a switch. Fluorescent lights flickered on, humming to life and revealing the full scope of the space. Leo had it checked over last week, just in case. In case of what? Arthur wondered. In case they found an honest man in a gutter? At the back of the shop was a steep staircase. Marco led him up to a small, simple apartment. It consisted of one main room with a kitchenette, a small bathroom, and a bedroom just big enough for a bed and a dresser. It was sparsely furnished, but everything was clean. A new mattress, still in plastic, was on the bed frame. In the refrigerator, there was milk, eggs, bread, and a package of bacon. On the counter sat a fresh pot of coffee, waiting to be brewed. Arthur walked to the window and looked down at the street. He could see people walking by, cars passing. He was a part of the world again. Not below it, not hiding from it, but in it. He turned to Marco, his throat thick with an emotion he couldn't name. I don't know what to say." Marco shrugged, a hint of a smile on his face. "Don't say anything. Just do good work. Leo values that. Show up on Monday morning. I'll come by with a list of what needs doing." He placed a wallet on the small kitchen table. "Here, it's your first week's pay in advance. Get yourself some new clothes, some food, whatever you need." He started to leave, then paused at the door. The old man who had this place before Gallo. He worked for the Rossi family for 50 years. He was family. Leo doesn't forget people. He gave Arthur a final, meaningful look. "Don't make him." The door clicked shut, leaving Arthur alone in the silence of his new home. He walked over to the bed, touching the plastic on the mattress. He ran his hand along the dusty workbench. He turned on the faucet and splashed warm water on his face. It was real. He had a key in his pocket, a roof over his head, a job to go to. He had returned a wallet, but they had given him back his life. But what does a man do with a second chance he never believed he would get? The first few months were a blur of rediscovery. Arthur worked with a fervor he hadn't felt in years. His hands, once clumsy and stiff from the cold, quickly remembered the familiar feel of the tools, the rasp of a plane on wood, the satisfying thud of a hammer, the precise curl of a wood shaving from a chisel. These were the rhythms that brought him back to life. He started with the small things, repairing a broken fence for one of Leo's tenants, fixing a sticking door at the social club, building new shelves for the back room of the bakery. Each completed task was a small victory, a piece of himself that he was reclaiming. The people of the neighborhood, who had once looked through him, now greeted him. "Morning, Arthur," they'd say. "That fence looks good." A simple nod, a small word of acknowledgement. It was a currency more valuable than any dollar. He was no longer invisible. He bought new clothes, simple work shirts and jeans. He got a haircut. He started to look in the mirror again and see a flicker of the man he used to be. The haunted, hollowed-out look in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a quiet competence. He never saw Leo Rossi directly, but he felt his presence. Marco would stop by every Monday with a new list of tasks and his weekly pay, always in cash, always on time. Sometimes there would be an extra 100 in the envelope. When Arthur tried to question it, Marco would just clap him on the shoulder and say, "Leo appreciates good work." It wasn't charity, it was a bonus, an acknowledgement of a job well done. He was being treated with a dignity he had forgotten existed. One afternoon, he was finishing a repair on a porch railing a few blocks from his workshop. He looked up and saw Angelo Rossi sitting on the porch of the brick house, enjoying the autumn sun. Their eyes met. Arthur gave a small, respectful nod. The old man smiled, a genuine, warm smile, and nodded back. No words were exchanged, but everything was understood. In that silent moment of connection, Arthur finally understood the true nature of the gift he'd been given. It wasn't just the apartment or the job. It was this. It was community. It was the intricate, unseen web of loyalty and respect that held this neighborhood together. The Rossi family, for all their fearsome reputation, were the weavers of that web. They weren't saints, but they were shepherds. They protected their flock, and through a simple act of honesty, Arthur had become one of them. He had found a family not of blood, but of principle. He had returned a wallet containing $2,000 and a photograph. In return, he had been given not just a home and a job, but a place to belong. He had been given back his name. And in the quiet, hard-working days that followed, he knew he would spend the rest of his life honoring that debt, one repaired board, one hammered nail at a time. What do you think defines a family? Is it blood, or is it the code you live by? Arthur's story shows us that sometimes the strongest bonds are forged not in households, but in moments of unexpected honor. His single act of compassion rippled through a community he thought had cast him out, proving that integrity is a language everyone understands, even those who live by their own rules. If this story moved you, please subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss our next one. And we'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed an act of kindness that had unexpected, life-changing consequences? Share your story. We could all use a reminder that sometimes the smallest good deed can rebuild a world.